welcome back to the penultimate session of today on spectrum license assignments and spectrum variations. I hope you all enjoyed the fantastic lunch. I certainly had my fair share of the amazing pad thai that was on offer. So, the food here has been absolutely amazing. So with me here today, we have Session7 from Collier Consulting, who will step in for Joseph from Secure to first tell us more about spectrum auction design and optimal design, and then later on will present his own slides on spectrum variations. We then have stakeholder responses from Stein, from Telenor, from Sud here, TRA India, and from Rizwan, PTA Pakistan, who will be sharing their experience in running spectrum auctions in their countries. So first up, I wanted to give you a little bit of introduction of where assignments have gone to, what is sort of best practice at the moment, so compare beauty contests and direct assignments to auctions, then have a brief look at what's going on in the region, and present two case studies to show that there's great potential in this region to learn from each other. So, first of all, traditionally licenses used to be assigned on a first come, first served basis, and beauty contests until in the 1990s the FCC introduced auctions, which have then been adopted pretty much all across North America, Europe, and as we'll see, also in Asia Pacific. Now, why auctions? Why not direct assignments? Why not beauty contests? There are three main arguments for for the use of spectrum auctions. The first one is it leads to an efficient allocation if you get the auction design right. Generally, the regulator is at an informational disadvantage. So when you run a beauty contest and somebody tells you about all the wonderful things that they can do with the spectrum, well, you have no real way of knowing whether that's actually going to materialize. And you'll only actually find out, a long way down what's actually been happening, whether what was said is actually true. In an auction, interested buyers need to put their money where their mouth is, so they themselves have to back up their claims with actual financial commitments, which will then lead to an efficient outcome. Also, auctions are far more transparent than beauty contests. Beauty contests are usually quite opaque, and the results may appear to favor certain parties, so that could lead to claims of favoritism or corruption. So auctions really reduce the scope for legal challenges if they're well set up, if you've consulted the industry beforehand. Then the rules are clear, and there's a much lower risk of a legal challenge after the award. The third point is that with auctions, you can actually reveal a true market price for a scarce public resource. That doesn't only help the public purse, so you get your fair market value for that spectrum, which means that, and that's what economists have been calling a distortion-free tax, means that you don't have to raise taxes for other means, like say income tax or property tax. So that's great. Equally, not charging a fair market price means that you're actually favoring a certain industry, which is akin to state aid. So then the question really is, why are you supporting the mobile industry and not any other industry? So these are really the three key advantages of auctions. Now, what you lose with auctions is control over the process. So you don't know who's going to end up with how much spectrum. And some regulators fear that, well, they may not be able to achieve their policy objectives, but this really depends on the auction design, and Stefan will elaborate on that later, so I'll leave that to him. So another concern is implementation risk, so loopholes in the auction rules which could be exploited by a bidder. So you really need to make sure that with your auction rules and the setup, that bids are committing. They have financial commitment that is ideally backed up. So overall, a well-designed competitive auction provides the greatest scope for an efficient allocation. Now across the region, I would say that there's a number of countries which have been running spectrum auctions for a very long time and quite successfully as well. And we'll hear more about the experience from India and Pakistan on that. There's some countries are sort of on the fence, where they've used direct assignments before, but now are sort of thinking about some more market-based mechanisms. And then there are other countries where it's probably harder to start a market-based approach. Say Japan is probably going to continue assigning licenses administratively. But overall, I think the region is moving towards market-based mechanisms, also quite successfully in many cases. And I think there's a huge potential to learn from each other. So, and on that, I just want to present two case studies. The first one is the recently completed Thai 1800 megahertz auction, and then the upcoming Singapore multi-band auction. Now in Thailand, the traditional BTO license scheme with CAT and TOT controlling access to spectrum is slowly being replaced by an auction mechanism. So when those BTO licenses run out, the regulator here is required to actually auction that spectrum. But with that, there comes a lot of legal uncertainty. So CAT and TOT are certainly trying to get as much concessions out of the government as possible whenever that happens. So and all the way up until the auction, there were actually threats of injunctions by both of them. So that created a lot of uncertainty. Furthermore, this situation here has led to significant uncertainty over future awards of spectrum and spectrum availability. So the NBTC was really under a lot of time pressure to complete the auction. It received 4 applications, so the 3 mobile operators here, plus a new entrant, Jazz, and then completed the auction at really great speed to make sure that it finishes before any further legal action could be taken. And in terms of the auction design, it's fairly standard SMRA. There were 2 2x10 megahertz licenses in 900 and 2 2x50 megahertz licenses in 1800 available, and those were offered sequentially. In terms of the financial exposure that the NBTC took, that was fairly significant. There was only a minimal upfront deposit required, 5% of the reserve price, and no further top-ups required in the process because that had to be completed, I guess, at a great speed. So eventually that ended with an 18.7 million guarantee for an eventual 2.1 billion winning bid for 900 megahertz spectrum. The way this is set up, it was also very difficult for bidders to manage substitutability and complementarity between the spectrum. So if, say, an operator wants both 900 and 1800 together but not separately, because that's their business plan, then when they were bidding in the earlier 1800 megahertz auction, it's very hard for them to know whether or not they're going to end up with 900 spectrum as well. Equally, if you can work with either 900 or 1800, when you're bidding for 1800, it's not clear whether, okay, if you stop now, will you actually be able to get 900? So it's very difficult for bidders. Also, the block size, the big block sizes meant that bidders were bidding all or nothing. So you either win some spectrum or you don't win anything at all in the band. And that led to a bit of a gold rush, I would say. And yeah, when we contrast that to Singapore, where there's a clear legal framework with the IDA being responsible for spectrum management, and the IDA ran an extensive consultation process before the award, 2 consecutive consultations with stakeholder responses, followed by an objective review of those, and then a decision. That's very different to what happened in Thailand. The auction format is fairly standard. We're selling 700, 900 spectrum plus some spectrum 2.3 and 2.5, both TDD. There's going to be a package for a new entrant in the auction. Otherwise, the block size in 700 and 900 is 2 by 5, so fairly small block sizes, and bidders can bid for more than one block. And in the TDD, it's 5 megahertz block sizes. There's going to be a careful vetting process of the new entrant, so the entrant will have to prove its financial standing as well as technical capabilities. And during the auction, there are a number of financial safeguards in place to make sure that whatever bid is put in by the entrant is actually backed up by financial guarantee. Now, this whole setup is very different in that now bidders are actually competing for incremental spectrum. So say with the three large operators in the 700 megahertz band, you would expect each of them to be able to get 2 by 10. And then, so they would start bidding for 2 by 20, and at some point, some of them will fall down to 2 by 15, 2 by 10, and then the auction will finish because there's no more excess demand. This means that the price stops at that incremental value rather than the full value that is created when somebody drops out to nothing. And also, as the auction is held simultaneously for all bands, it's much easier for bidders to manage complementarity and substitutability. So I'll leave it at that comparison, and thank you very much for listening. I'll pass on over to Stefan, who will be presenting Joseph's slides on spectrum auction design.
Right, my name is not Joseph, and I'm not from Specure. So my name is Stefan Seeler from Colliago Consulting, but Joseph can't be with us today for personal reasons. So he asked me to present this on his behalf. And his presentation is really about best practice in conducting of electronic spectrum auctions. Who is Specure? It's an Austrian company, and they have developed some software to help with spectrum auctions and also some net testing software services. They've done a number of auctions, including complicated CCAs, SMRAs, so different auction formats in Austria and a number of other countries. One of the points that Joseph would like to make, that in an auction is inherently risky for the auctioneer, as we have seen from the case study that was just presented from Thailand, where in fact one of the bidding bidders then decided not to pay. So first of all, it is important before you think about auction design or any of that to assess all the risks you're facing as an auctioneer. You have a choice. I might go for something complex. This is what is increasingly people looking at, complex auction format. So that presents a challenge. There may be auction rules that lead to maybe suboptimal outcomes. And the auction may not meet the goal that was set up, for example, sell all the spectrum. It may also be subject to subsequent legal disputes or wrangling. What should you do ideally as an operator? Well, you could try to become an expert yourself, but you'd be pitting up against people who do this for a living, whereas in the life of a regulator, auctions don't come along that often. So one of the other aspects is simplify the process. If there is no need to complicate, why complicate it? a number of things to juggle. One of the key things, I think, is to have a transparent auction process that is consistent with the goals, policy goals, and the strategy that has been set for spectrum management. There's a communication to the general public, stakeholder, as well as flexibility to events as they may unfold. So before starting with the auction design proper, there needs to be a clear visibility of the spectrum strategy in the country. In other words, bidders must have visibility with regards to the future availability of bands that are not in this auction, because it will affect the bidding behavior. The auction goals should be set out clearly. You have to think about the format, and that needs to be debated. Block sizing, should there be any spectrum caps in the interest of competition, and maybe in the interest of societal development. How about coverage obligation? Set-asides for new entrants have been a feature, less so in the maturing market. And last but not least, what should be the minimum of reserve prices, i.e. the opening bids? Generally speaking, in preparing for an auction, there's 4 things you need to consider. Ideally, you'd start off with a public consultation, then move on to the implementation. You hold the live auction and eventually award the license. But there is work afterwards, for example, monitoring with regards to meeting coverage obligation. But let's take the first step, the public consultation. As Hans has said, this was done very well in Singapore. It is done very well in a number of markets in the Asia-Pacific region. For example, New Zealand is one of the regulators that runs a very smooth consultation process. So it consists of the regulator publishes a proposal, has some specific questions. Then there is one round of submissions from the stakeholders. These submissions are published on the website. Then there's a second round of cross-submissions, and then the regulator publishes conclusions, including the rationale for choosing one option over another. So it's not just making a decision, I do this, but I do this because, and I do not that because. So there's a weighing of pros and cons at the auction, and all of that is done in public. The benefit of that is that it's not just that you get all the stakeholder views, but if you get all the stakeholder views, you are more likely to have a successful auction. So it's all about avoiding auction failure. You then prepare the final invitation to tender, and you go on to the implementation of the auction. Some procedures, guidelines, software needs to be developed, demonstrations to the regulatory authority. You have to publish an auction manual, probably run several mock auctions, test it and so on, because as I said, a lot of things can go wrong. And the users also need to be trained in the auction platform. Then it comes to the actual live auctions. You might start with mock auctions, maybe some pre-auctions for new entrants, and the auction itself, the live auction itself, requires careful monitoring. For example, if prices go up, do you need to ask people who are bidding in the auction for additional bank guarantees as the prices are escalating? And finally, of course, there's the evaluation of the auction results. That can be simple. In certain auction formats, you know the minute the auction has ended, who is the winner, and you're done. And in others, it might be a little bit more complicated. The auction data should be stored securely to be available for subsequent audit, and perhaps there should be an auction report. You then award the licenses and monitor, for example, whether the bidder or whoever acquired the license has met the coverage obligations they entered into. So, key learning points then: becoming an expert, yeah, to a certain extent. Go on some of these courses about auctions. transparency about the process is actually helpful because it helps you to discover weaknesses in your own process, some flexibility, and as I said, deal with the weaknesses as they are discovered. Ignoring them is the worst thing that could be done. So, incorporating stakeholder feedback and really raises the awareness of the risks such as there might be, and designing an auction or running or going into an auction is not something you can do in 1 or 2 months. I think half a year or longer is probably an appropriate time to prepare for a spectrum auction. That brings me to the end of Joseph's presentation. If there are any simple questions, I can answer them later, but I'm not the expert. But I'll now go on to my own presentation.
Thanks, Stefan.
Right, the title is slightly different from that in the program. I really wanted to look at spectrum prices, or what operators pay, in the context of setting reserve prices for spectrum. That is certainly, we have mostly regulators here in the audience, and setting a reserve price for spectrum is something that is by no means easy. What is an appropriate reserve price in the context of conflicting policy goals? A point I quite like to make, sometimes people say spectrum is valuable. Well, actually, spectrum isn't valuable per se. Value is only extracted if operators invest, build networks, and communication passes through it. And this only makes sense from an investor's perspective if they can earn appropriate returns. If they can't earn appropriate returns, money flows into some other investments of similar risk. So this is an important thing to note. The notion that spectrum is inherently valuable is simply not true. Value has to be extracted. How do operators actually value spectrum? Well, conceptually it's very simple. We have got this chart here. What you do a business plan, or the operator does a business plan assuming they do not acquire any new spectrum, and then they do a second business plan assuming they do acquire a spectrum. And the business plan is valued in terms of the net present value, using discounted cash flow plus a terminal value, and the amount an operator is prepared to pay for the spectrum is simply the difference between the two business cases. Let's say $1, okay? So that's how operators value spectrum. Conceptually, very simple, but of course, you're doing business plans over a 15-year period. It involves forecasting traffic, forecasting improvements in technology, and so on and so forth. So the value to an operator of spectrum is the net present value of the incremental cash flows that can be generated from acquiring that particular spectrum asset. What are these cash flows? Well, there are of course some immediate cash outflows, aren't there? You have to pay the license fee, and you then have to deploy the network. For example, if you deploy some 700 megahertz spectrum, you have to roll out 700 megahertz radio, maybe build some more backhaul and so on and so forth. You then have further negative cash flows, which are any annual fees, which you might have to pay for the spectrum, as well as incremental network operating costs. And only then come positive cash flows, which might be additional revenue, as well as cost savings. If I have more spectrum, I have to build fewer sites, I don't have to go push down sectorization, I might avoid building small sites. So that's the CapEx and OpEx avoidance value of spectrum. But there is a problem. One of the things I looked at on the previous slide was additional revenue. Well, where is the additional revenue? Or indeed, is there any additional revenue? When you look at the mobile industry worldwide, you'll find that there is little or no revenue growth. Indeed, in many markets, it has been going down in nominal terms. In other markets, still going up in nominal terms, but it's actually declining in real terms. And yet, data traffic, as you've seen on many slides, is going through the roof. So the notion that investment in LTE generates much additional revenue is simply not true. Okay, we have seen some ARPU increases here and there, for example, the dollar in the US and so on. That's great, but it's by no means a huge amount. And yet, the industry is acquiring ever more spectrum to deliver mobile broadband, to cope with that data traffic. And here are the various bands. Many operators in this region, let's say in places like Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, they're probably already using all the bands. And some of the other markets are just starting to use the 2.5 or 2.6, 2300 and so on. And there are many, many other future bands, as we have heard. So the notion that the notion that investment in spectrum somehow generates additional revenue is simply not true. So we have observed declines, and it is yet investment continues at a rapid pace. A simple example of increased costs. So if, let's say, an operator is acquiring some 700 spectrum, sometimes there's a sort of notion, 700 spectrum is great because it allows you to do things more cheaply. Well, yes, if you started from scratch and you have the choice between 700 and 2100, yes, 700 would be better. But the reality is, if you're an existing operator and you're buying some 700 megahertz spectrum, it's existing cost. You're not it's additional cost. There's no substitution. It's incremental capex for the LTE radio, the 700 radio. In addition, there may be some wider coverage rollout applications attached to the spectrum. Again, additional capex and OpEx. And the spectrum is used to carry mobile broadband traffic, so it's not as if you're then saying, I'm going to get rid of some spectrum I'm already holding. No, everything is incremental. So the acquisition of 700 spectrum and the deployment of LTE increases costs rather than decreasing costs. So for every dollar of revenue, operators require ever more spectrum. So there can be only one possible conclusion from that the price per megahertz per pop that operators pay for spectrum has to decline. So we cannot look backwards at some of the prices that was paid in the past and say, well, that's great, this is what operators will be prepared to pay. No, they'll only be prepared, or they can only pay incremental amounts because the cash isn't around to pay for it. Now you might ask yourself, this being so, nevertheless we're seeing that operators keep investing. Why is this so? You're saying there's no additional revenue, only additional costs. Why on earth would you invest? Well, it has something to do with competition. Operators compete to deliver the always best connected value proposition. So that's user experience speed, probability of coverage in urban areas, wider geographic coverage, and consistency of speed within urban areas. And in this way, if you do that, you attract high-value smartphone customers. But in a sense, this is a zero-sum game for the industry as a whole. So you acquire spectrum merely to maintain the equilibrium. So what drives competition here is innovation. So operator A in the markets invests in better LTE, aggregates some bands, better speeds. In order to maintain the equilibrium, operator B will do the same. So when we do business plans for operators, the investment in spectrum is never justified by actually gaining additional revenue. It's always justified by preventing the loss of revenue. If I don't acquire it, but my competitor does, my business will take a bit of a nosedive. That is what's justifying the investment in spectrum today in a mature market. Now, I've looked at what I found is a fairly extreme case of setting reserve prices. That's the auction that proposed in India. A lot of spectrum is supposed to be auctioned, 700 megahertz and a bit of leftover other spectrum. That's a good thing, because the industry is crying out for spectrum. So putting up all the spectrum into the auction, that's a great thing. But the totality of the reserve price comes to over 5 trillion Indian rupee. The 700 alone, 4 trillion rupee. But guess what? The total industry revenue in India, annual revenue, is only 2 billion rupees. So it exceeds the total industry revenue by a factor of 2. I've done some benchmarking because ultimately we talked about valuation, and what is valuation? Valuation is essentially discounted cash flow. So you have to look at the free cash flow generated by the industry, or operating free cash flow. A simple way of calculating operating free cash flow is your EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So that's the cash flow you generate from operations, minus CapEx, or capital expenditure, gives you your operating free cash flow. And I compare the reserve prices proposed for India with the recent auctions in Germany and the US. Why do I do that? Because there were fairly chunky auctions in terms of the amount of spectrum on offer and prices paid. So as you can see here on the, if I look at the German example, the free cash flow, operating free cash flow was around about 3 billion. It's about 3 billion euro in 2015. That's a 17% free cash flow margin. That is, free cash flow as a percentage of sales. The amount of spectrum that was auctioned was 270 megahertz, and auction proceeds amounted to 1.8 billion, 1.792 to be precise. So that's roughly 59% of annual free cash flow. The AWS auction earlier in 2015 generated 30 billion compared to an industry cash flows just shy of 50 billion. So that's about 61% of industry free cash flow. Now if I make the same calculation for India, the operating free cash flow, 237 billion there, but the auction proposed, if everything got sold at the reserve, that's 5.3 trillion, that's 2,254 times annual industry free cash flow. Another way of putting it, that's 22 years worth of industry free cash flow. This really illustrates it all. Here we've got the proposed reserve prices, the industry revenue, and the mobile industry pre-tax operating free cash flow. So I'm not quite sure whether this is going to work out. We have now seen a number of failed auctions, Australia being one of the first ones, excessively high reserve prices for 700 megahertz, spectrum remained unused, Mozambique, Ghana, Brazil, Senegal, and so on. So, in all of these cases, these are failed auctions. Why are they failed auctions? Well, you hold an auction after all to sell the spectrum, so if you're not selling it, that is failure. And also, if the Ministry of Finance penciled in as their contribution to the government coffers, at least all the spectrum being sold at the reserve price, then if not all the spectrum is being sold, again, that's failure. And unsold spectrum is not only an embarrassment for the government, but it also does some real harm to ordinary people, to the economy, because spectrum that lies fallow does no good. And we have all seen in the previous presentations the relationship between deployment of mobile broadband and GDP. So how then can you do things differently? How should regulators set reserve prices? Well, one of the problems you might face in the market, if you only have, let's say, 3 bidders, and you have 2 by 45 megahertz available, the 3 operators might moderate their demand. Let's say, you know what, each one of us is happy with 2 by 15 megahertz, and both you sell at the reserve price. So in this case, the question is what the reserve price should be is a very relevant one. So how should you go about it? I suggest you might want to look at the operating free cash flow of the weakest operator in the market, the weakest operator. Why the weakest operator? Because you must ensure that the weakest operator still has a chance of acquiring their fair share of spectrum, or else you get a competitive imbalance. And this is exactly what happened in Australia, isn't it? Telstra, the biggest operator, acquired 4 blocks out of the 700 spectrum. Optus acquired 2, and Vodafone left with none. And here we're looking at an industry which is already relatively uncompetitive, shall we say. We used to have 4 operators, we had consolidation, it went down to 3, and now we're having 3 operators, but one of them is of course seriously handicapped. They might catch up a little bit through refarming the 850 and so on, but nevertheless, it's not the same. But that's a possible solution. You might also go down a completely different route, as this example from Chile demonstrates. Why did I put this picture here? I think spectrum policy should be all about people and the future of these people. And this is what the regulator and the policymakers in Chile took into account. In the 700 megahertz award process, they had fairly stringent obligation: connect 1,281 rural towns, connect schools, build fiber. They also had pro-competition measures, mandated MVNO access, and they chose deliberately not to extract money from the industry. The reserve price was derisory, less than 2 cents per megahertz pop, compared to, for example, in excess of $2 being paid for AWS spectrum in the United States. So here's another way of doing it. It depends, it's a policy choice, essentially. Thank you very much.
Right. Let's move on to the stakeholder responses, and I'd like to invite Stein over. Tell us a bit more about, I believe it's a related issue to what we've just discussed. So looking forward to that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a bit related, although I think Stefan measures spectrum prices as a percentage of free cash flow. But I have something called spectrum to sales, where I actually look at revenue of the mobile business. And I just compare it with the prices paid in auction during a certain time period. And then we get a number which sort of says something about the profitability of the industry. So, Tolmo Group, we have a presence in Europe, in the Nordics and the Balkans, and in a large part of Asia. Looking at the spectrum holdings we have, they range from very large holdings in Europe, typically between 150 and 300 megahertz, to much smaller holdings in Asia. In the previous session, there was a discussion on spectrum efficiency. I think in India we are one of the smaller operators, and on average in the circles where we operate in India, we have 2 times 6 megahertz of 1800 spectrum. And on those 6 megahertz, we operate 2G and 4G services. And we serve 42 million customers on those 6 megahertz. There might be more spectrum efficient systems around, but if you know about them, please tell me in the break, because I would love to hear about them. Here in Thailand, we are the largest shareholder of DTAC, one of the mobile operators. In Telenor Group, we have a small spectrum team, typically participates in 5 to 6 spectrum auctions each year. And most of the countries where we are present, they do indeed have auctions. This is a very simplified balance sheet for a mobile operator. I'm not an economist, so I made this for myself, but I'm sharing it with you. Top line is, of course, the revenue of the mobile business. Then you have your operational costs, typically the salaries you have to pay to people, rents, electricity, and so on. And let's say they are in the order of 60 to 70% of the revenues. If you subtract that number from the revenues, you have what they call EBITDA. And obviously you need some cash to build base stations, and that's what you call capex. And at the end you end up with your profits. So if we compare, and with the profits, you have to buy spectrum, right? So if the price you have to pay for the spectrum is higher than your profits over a certain time period or over forever, then obviously you as an industry has a problem. So I'll show you a few examples of what I call the spectrum to sales ratio. Most mobile operators, they have a long tradition of actually publishing capex numbers. To the degree, the practice of actually publishing what you pay for spectrum varies a lot over the sector. But most of the information is available if you want to look for it. When it comes to the spectrum available in this region, I mean the good news is that a modern smartphone actually covers, if not the whole of the 1300 megahertz available in Asia, and a lot of it. The bad news, or let's say the facts, is that if you look at the Telenor customer base in Asia, only 40% of our customers actually have a smartphone. But as prices for smartphones come down, we think there's a significant growth potential in this space. But still, for a few years ahead, the key bands for us will be the 850, 900, 1800, and 2100 in Asia. So what we are seeing is that, as Stefan also indicated, that as a share of pocket, people don't spend any more on mobile telephony, at least in developed countries, as they did for 10 years ago. There is actually a decline in margins. And I read a recent report from one of the share analysts in Europe last year, and their sort of takeaway on the European mobile industry was that returns on total investment have fallen to the cost of capital. And of course, you still have a lot of number 1 and number 2 operators that do fairly good. But in many countries in Europe, you will see that number 3 and number 4 operators really struggle. And that's also probably the reason behind a lot of consolidation that we've seen lately, and a lot of network sharing arrangements. And again, given else equal, given that revenues are not increasing, then as you add more spectrum, and if you kind of expect to pay, let's say, a certain percentage each year, then the additional cost for acquiring more spectrum will basically have to go down. So what I wanted to do was to, let's say we take Thailand as an example. No, I don't really know how much spectrum will be assigned in Thailand. We can look at a lower amount, saying that, okay, there will be no new spectrum in Thailand. It will only be the 850, the 900, the 1800 and 2100 bands, as are being used today. And we can look at a kind of upper amount of spectrum, which is basically the same bands we have been looking at these two last days. And we can take the auction prices in the 900 auction last year as a point of departure. We say that this spectrum is going to be either sold or renewed in the next 15-year period. High frequency will be lower prices than low frequency, about 2.5 times lower. That's just a number we use to benchmark. We can typically say that we need to look at the growth in the market overall. Thailand has had a very high GDP growth during the last 40 years or so. So let's assume that the market growth in Thailand is 6%. And then we will see that as a percentage of revenues, even if there is no new spectrum released in Thailand, you will actually have to pay 20% of your revenues on a yearly basis. And if you look at the upper spectrum amount there, you will have to pay 40% of the revenues. If you compare these numbers, for instance, with figures from the United States, I've been doing auctions close to 25 years, I think. If you look at all the spectrum sold in the United States over the last 25-year or so period, the same number is actually 5.5%. So I think if you're looking at this sort of spectrum to sales number, and you sort of move outside of your profits or your free cash flow, then you could potentially be looking at a loss-making industry in the future. So that's about sums up what I wanted to say. I think setting these reserve prices based on historic price points, as you have so much new spectrum coming into the market, will not be realistic for the future. So thank you very much for your time.
Looking forward to the response from Sujay from the TRA India.
Good afternoon. Clarification is not a response to the presentations done earlier. It's just a presentation about what we do in India. First, I'll try to give small background of the telecom sector in the country, in India, and then how we value the spectrum and what are the spectrum design. I'll not touch much about the 700 which Stephen has talked about. Small snapshot we have 1 million plus mobile subscribers, as most of you must be knowing. But one major difference between Indian telecom sector and in most of the developed world is that mobile phones are the first phones as far as India is concerned, because our fixed line phones are very less. When we started, there were about 40 million, and now we have come down to about 25 million. So unlike other countries where mobile phones were the second phones, in India the mobile phones are the first phones which the consumers use. And similarly for broadband, as fixed lines were not there in the country, so our fixed broadband numbers are very small, and most of the broadband or the internet is being done through mobile. So these are the two major differences which sets apart the country from other developed countries. So as far as India is concerned, for the coming few years, we rely only on our mobile or wireless industry. A snapshot of the growth of wireless in India. We started somewhere in 94-95, and from that time when the tariffs were as high as rupees 12, which is about 20 cents, we have come down where the tariffs are as low as half a rupee, so 1/20th of a dollar. And the tele-density the number of subscribers also has increased from, now we are touching 1 million. What are our policy objectives as far as the spectrum is concerned? The first one is to promote efficient utilization of the spectrum, to increase the availability of spectrum with the operators. Again, this is also a major point that unlike other countries where there are 2 or 3 or maximum 4 operators, we have about 10 operators, and the amount of spectrum which is available with each operator is 1/3 or 1/4 of the average of other countries. So this is one of the major goal is to increase the availability of spectrum, to allocate it in a transparent and market mechanism, ensure healthy competition, then strike a balance between consumer service providers and government revenues. So this is also a goal as far as the spectrum allocation is concerned, and to promote investment in innovation. Just quick background, we started mobile in 94, and initially right from 94-95 to 2008, the spectrum was bundled with the license. So we had a service license, and the spectrum was given along with the license. It was not separate as in a number of other countries. So though in 94-95 also we gave it through a market mechanism through a sealed tender process, but it was primarily the license which was given, and the spectrum was given subsequently in an administrative manner as the number of subscribers increased with a service provider. More spectrum was given to him without any additional charges. And initially we had, it was not technology neutral also. Spectrum was initially given for GSM and subsequently for CDMA technology, but the operator was not allowed to use any other technology using that spectrum till 2010 when the spectrum was given through auction. So, as I said, what are our regulatory principles as far as management, spectrum management is concerned? We believe in market-based mechanism. We also believe that we have to balance conflicting interests, promoting efficient utilization, recovering the administrative and farming cost, promoting market-based mechanism, and also encouraging affordability, as India is a very price-sensitive market. So affordability is one of the key concerns which we have to keep in mind while fixing the valuation or the reserve price of the spectrum. And like I said, after 2010, we are service and technology neutral as far as the spectrum is concerned. So we had a number of auctions. The first auction was in May 2010, and subsequently we had in November 2012, March 13, February 2014, March 2015, and I think the next auction we will be having quite soon, somewhere in July or August of this year. And the spectrum which will be acquired which has been acquired or will be acquired by the operators is technology neutral, and the price which it pays for the auction spectrum, like a number of operators are still having spectrum which was earlier given to them through administrative process. So if an operator wants to make that spectrum also technology neutral, can pay the price which the same band was sold in an auction, and convert its administratively allocated spectrum also into a technology neutral. Coming to the first auction in 2010, we auctioned spectrum in 2100 and 2300 megahertz band for 3G and BWA. In 2100, there was a condition that no operator will take more than one block of 2 into 5 megahertz, and in 2300, it was one block of 2 into 20 megahertz in the TDD mode. And if you see at that time when we set up the reserve price, we set it up with, by comparing it with the reserve price of other countries or the auction price of other countries, international benchmarks. And if you can see, the reserve price was set for 700 crore per megahertz. 1 crore is 10 million, so 7,000 million Indian rupees. And the auction price was around 5 times of that. And similarly for 2300, the reserve price and the auction price was about around 8 times. And this was set with keeping in view the price at which the spectrum was auctioned in other countries in the world. And while doing that, we didn't take into consideration the 2 countries, UK and Germany, where the auctions were held somewhere in 2000, and it was a very, very high price. So after keeping those 2 countries out, we set up the price, and in our country we got a price which was 5 to 8 times higher. So what I mean to say by this is that the valuation and the reserve price of the spectrum is highly situational. It changes from situation to situation, from country to country, and from time to time. It's not possible to determine determine the spectrum valuation, and so it's always better to have a number of methods and then take an average, so that it is better to be vague rather to be completely wrong. So what we have done is, we have a number of methods which, and incidentally when we determine the reserve price, we always do it through a consultation process. In fact, whatever we do in TRAI as a regulator, whether we issue some regulations, whether we give some recommendations to the government or anything, we always do a consultation process, an open consultation, where we call for comments from the stakeholders, the counter comments from the stakeholders. We hold open house discussions in few places in the country, and then we give a reasoned recommendation or take a decision with why and why not. So the methodologies which we have recently used for last 4-5 auctions is, one is we went bottom up, like you saw in the first slide. We have 22 licensed service areas, unlike most of the countries where the license is pan-country wise. We have 22 different licensed service areas, which more or less are equivalent to a state. And each state is different because of its topology, demographic, populations, GDP. So each state or each licensed service areas, we did a bottom-up approach for determining the valuation of the spectrum in that band. And based on the valuation, then we set up a reserve price which was about 80 or 80% of the valuation. So what are the methodologies that we have used? One is the opportunity cost, as Stephen had covered. He has presented only the DCF or the discounted cash flow technique. But apart from that, we have used 3-4 other methods also. One was the producer surplus model and production function model, economic efficiency techniques. Apart from these opportunity costs, we also did technical efficiency, that what is the technical efficiency or ratio between different bands. Then if that spectrum band was sold in some auction and the time period between that auction and the subsequent auction was not more than 2 years, so we did some kind of an indexation also based on the SBI PLR, that's a bank rate. Then we also did some regression analysis also, multiple regression and single regression. So what I am trying to tell you is that we use a number of methods and then we try to take an average, because we know that it's not possible, anyone, there is no sure method or mathematical formula for either valuing the spectrum or finding its reserve price, and it's difficult, in fact it's not possible to compare different countries as far as the value of a spectrum in a country is concerned, because each country again has very different needs, demand. Then it also based on the spectrum, how many operators are there in a country, how much of spectrum you are selling, what is the band, what is the bandwidth which you are selling, whether the spectrum is contiguous or is non-contiguous. So there are a number of factors which actually determine the value of a spectrum in a particular country. So I'll just give you a brief of these methods which we have used. The producer surplus method, as most of you know, that the amount of spectrum is inversely related to the expenditure on the RAN required for serving a particular level of demand. So it's inversely proportional. So by taking certain key inputs, we projected the subscriber base, traffic, cost, and capex and opex per BTS. And this presentation is now available on the website, so you can download it, see it. So by these arithmetical calculations, we try to find one value of the spectrum. The other method which we used was production function method, where again we use a Cobb-Douglas function, which is quite a famous economic model, where the input and output are based on the inputs, the output is calculated. So we use traffic minutes and the quantum of the spectrum as proxies for the inputs, and the amount of spectrum and the number of BTS as inputs, and what is the total traffic which we require as an output, and then we calculated the value of the spectrum in that band. Another method which we used was the economic efficiency technique. This we used for assessing the value of the 900 megahertz spectrum. What we did was that first, by these methods, we calculated the value of the 1800 megahertz spectrum, and then comparing the economic efficiency, if that 1800 is replaced by a 900 megahertz spectrum, what will be the cost saving, or what is an operator can do. And based on that, we tried to put a value to the 900 megahertz spectrum. Another was the revenue surplus model, which is what Stephen has talked about, the DCF method. Another method which we used was the technical efficiency factor, that what is the technical efficiency between different spectrum bands. These are the factors which we used between 1800 and 800, 900 and 2100. Then, as I said, indexation was one other method, that if any spectrum was sold some time back in one of the auction, then can we index it and find the present value of that spectrum. And two regression analysis we did, because sometimes in some of the LSAs, license service areas, some spectrum was unsold. So to know the value of that spectrum in a subsequent auction, we used the auction value which was realized for other license service areas, and using variables like what is the minutes of usage, or the gross revenue, or the GDP of that LSA. We try to do a multiple regression analysis and try to fix the value. So these are the different valuation methods we use, and after arriving at the average valuation derived from these different methods, we fix up the reserve price as 80% of that value. Now coming to our spectrum auction conditions, we have certain conditions in each auction. One is the eligibility criteria, the other is the spectrum cap. Because we have a condition that no operator can take more than 25% of spectrum in a particular band, and 50% of the spectrum in a particular band, and 25% of the spectrum in the all the bands. So if in an LSA, in a license service area, we have about, say, 80 megahertz of spectrum in all the bands together, then an operator can't take more than 25%, that is 20 megahertz. So this was one of the conditions in all the auctions, that if someone already has that much spectrum, then it can't bid in the auction. Other was the rollout condition, or the coverage criteria, and then the payment terms. Now one thing which I would like to tell you is that unlike a number of countries, in our country the payment terms for the auction are not that the operator has to pay the whole amount upfront as soon as the auction finishes. Presently the payment conditions are that the operator has to pay 25% of the amount upfront, and then after a 2-year gap, he starts paying for the rest of the amount, and he does it in next 10 years. So actually he pays the whole amount in 12 years. And in the recent the next coming auction in 2016, July 2016 or August 2016, we have further modified this criteria or this payment terms to make it more easy for our operators. So now what we have suggested or recommended to the government is that the operator will have to pay only 10% upfront, and then rest in equal installments or howsoever it wants in next 19 years. So it is like pay as you go. So the high amount of spectrum reserve price, even if it is, I don't know whether it is high or not, but even if it is, then the operator is allowed to pay it in next 19, 20 years. What our format, we have a simultaneous ascending auction, SMRR auction. It consists of two stages. One is the clock stage and the other is the frequency identification stage. In the clock stage, in each clock round, the bidding takes place, and when the final bid is finalized, then the frequency identification stage takes place, where which frequency will be given to a particular operator is decided. So some overview, simultaneous bidding for all 22 service areas. And after each clock round, the bidders are ranked based on how they bid. And then if the excess demand is 0 or positive, so suppose if the supply is 5 blocks and the demand is 6 or 7 or even 5, then the next clock round takes place, where the reserve price is increased by a certain amount. It ranges from 1 to 10%. And unlike another difference between India and some of the other countries, we have still huge potential for growth. As you see, the number of people yet to be connected are around 550 million. And if we talk about the wireless internet or broadband, which is very high, it's about 950 million. So there is a huge potential as far as India is concerned. And revenue even if you see the revenue figures, it is growing at a healthy pace. The year-on-year growth in the revenues are about 12 to 13%. Just quick some results of the auction. Just wanted to share with you that the reserve price and the auction price. Though the reserve price, every time when we do an auction, the operators say and the experts say that the reserve price is set very high. But whenever we have the auction price which we have received, are generally more than except the 2100 megahertz, where the spectrum was not sold in 3 licensed service areas in the metros. The reserve price are generally lower than the final price, and generally most of the spectrum which has been put on auction has been sold. This time we will be also auctioning 700 megahertz band and 2 into 35 megahertz or 700 megahertz band. And the reserve price which has been set, it amounts to about 4,000 billion. But what I am trying to tell you is that if 10% is only has to be paid the first year, it does not amount to a very big figure. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to ask which one from next. So this is more about his experience with
Thank you, Hans. And thank you, organizers, for planning very informative sessions and excellent arrangements. And now another dose of information. This is my presentation outline, and let's go to the first slide. So, history of cellular industry in Pakistan. In 1990, we gave the first time 2 licenses, analog mobile licenses, one to Paktel and another to Instaphone. And then in 1992, we brought in the first GSM operator, Mobilink. In 98, another Uphone GSM operator. And till this time, there used to be no auctions. Licenses were given pretty cheap. Then finally in 2004, we started auctioning the spectrum for mobile licenses, and we gave 2 licenses as a result of auction, one to Telenor and one to Wallet. In 2007, China Mobile Pakistan bought Paktel and started the GSM service with the brand name of Zong. And then after a bit of gap in 2014, we auctioned licenses for 3G and 4G. We termed it as next generation mobile services spectrum. And this is where the history is now. So talking a little bit about the auction in 2004, in Pakistan, the process of awarding licenses is that the government gives a policy directive, and the regulator is the one which executes the policy. So the government gave a policy for auction, and the salient features of that 2004 auction were that the licenses would be technology neutral, spectrum would be given through auction, fees were introduced related to annual spectrum administration fees, R&D, universal service fund, and annual regulatory dues. Duration of each license was 15 years. 2 lots of 13.6 megahertz were auctioned for each license, in some spectrum in 900 and some in 1800 megahertz band. Telenor and Bharat, as I have already told you, won for $291 million each, and the conditions were that the licenses which were already operating at the time of renewal will be renewed at the same price. The result of this 2004 auction was that from a mere 5 million subscribers, it jumped to 88 million in 2008, and since then it had been going up and up. This small downside between 2014 and 15 was due to biometric verification. Now all SIMs in Pakistan are biometrically verified and then given to the users. So those which could not be verified had to be dropped. This is the coverage in all over Pakistan, and most of the people in Pakistan have access to at least 2G services. Areas which are not covered actually have very little population. We have around 90-95% population covered. The auction of 2014, again a policy directed by the government in 2013. So 2 bands, 21 megahertz and 1800 megahertz bands, and 1 slot in 850 megahertz was also kept for a new entrant. But we have already 5 licenses, so eventually nobody turned up. The information salient points of the information memorandum were that base prices were given for both the bands, the size of the lot was given, spectrum cap in 21 megahertz was 15 megahertz, and in 1800 megahertz it was 10 megahertz. And of course the eligibility conditions for both the spectrums were similar, except that to win a 10 megahertz slot in 1800 megahertz, an operator had to win at least 10 megahertz in 21 megahertz before that. Licenses 15 years, payment conditions 100% or 50% in advance, and rest within 5 years. of course, with some interest. And there will be no auction for the next 18 months, sorry. Auction was a two-stage auction. In the first stage, we got sealed bids with 15% earnest money, and after that, Samra in the second stage. Four existing operators, they bid for the spectrum. Two bid in both the lots, bands, and Mobilink and Telenor bid only in 21 megahertz. So the position was that in 21 megahertz the demand exceeded the supply, but in 18 megahertz it was equal to supply, which meant that there would be no auction in 21 megahertz band. But of course that condition applied that somebody had to win 10 megahertz in 21 megahertz first. The winners were all of the mobile operators won some spectrum. Mobilink, Telenor, Ufone won in 21 megahertz only, and Zong won in 21 megahertz also, and as a result also in 1800 megahertz. And the total amount raised as a result of auction was $1.22 billion. The 3G and 4G license awardees were given rollout targets with 4 phases, phase 1 to phase 4. 4G license has a little relaxed, that is, its phase 1 was to end in 1.5 years, whereas in case of 3G it is 9 months, and then the 4th phase is to end in 8 years, as opposed to 3G license 7 years. As of today, all of them have completed their phase 2, and phase 3 and 4 are not yet due. The auction of this, the impact of this auction, the broadband growth in 2014 from about 3.8 million subscribers has jumped to almost 31 million subscribers last month. And the data usage has gone from almost 13,000 terabytes in March 2014 to 30,000 terabytes in March 16, in 2 years' time. The coverage of 3G and 4G is as shown on this slide. It may look very small, and yes, of course, it's not well covered, but a lot of population is covered because these are all the major population centers where it is being provided. Another result of this auction was that this GfK forecast showing the market growth of smartphones in 2014, Pakistan appeared nowhere, whereas in 2015 it jumped to the 5th position. So the key lessons learned from the auction, segregating the auction into 2 stages with sealed bid as first step indicated the intention of the applicants to PTA. Then continuous engagement of stakeholders through media, press and direct had a positive impact. communication and dissemination of information on the website, to the courts, to media, and all stakeholders saved us from many problems during and after the auction. Selection of team of qualified professionals with the organization, strengthened by local and foreign consultants, was, we feel, another good step taken by the regulator. Help and advice of independent advisory groups and relevant government organizations like the ministry, which is the relevant Ministry of Information Technology and Telecommunications, Frequency Allocation Board, that was all very helpful. All this, what it means is that dissemination of information to everyone and consultation with maximum results into a finally better option. Another lesson from 2004 and 2014 auctions with the hindsight is that in 2004 we auctioned only 2G spectrum and the 3G was to be auctioned in 2007. But when in 2007 PTA asked the operators their readiness, no one was ready. No one wanted another option. So we had to delay it, and somehow or the other it kept delaying till 2014. In 2014, what we did was that instead of auctioning only 3G spectrum, PTA insisted on auctioning a little bit of 4G spectrum also. We think that this auctioning of the next spectrum created a bit of competitive pressure because only one operator won, and very quickly the fifth operator, who had not purchased any spectrum, carved some spectrum out of the existing 1800 MHz band and launched LTE. Had we done this thing in 2004 also, that auction a little bit of 3G along with the 2G spectrum, I think our auctions would have not been delayed so much. Now the future program, we have identified slots in 850 MHz and 1800 MHz band. These are basically those two lots which were unsold in 2014. We hired a consultant for market assessment and spectrum valuation, and he has submitted us the final report. The government is considering for a policy directive, and we expect to auction it in the next 2 or 3 months. So this is the future roadmap of Pakistan as regards this spectrum: 700 MHz band, 800, 850, 1800, 2100, 2300, and 2.6. We hope to have some spectrum freed up in 700 MHz and auction it. This was my last slide. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a bit of time for questions now.
Thank you.
One moment. Let's wait for the microwave.
Okay, first of all, interesting presentation. Now we understand better. Yesterday, Hans, you gave some explanation why the prices of the auction to go down. Now we understand better. When we see 0.5 ruby in India per 1 minute, we can understand that the prices of the spectrum are going down. What I was missing during the presentation was the secondary trading in Europe, in UK, for sure in the United States. We have an RFP sale. So when we buy a spectrum and we can resell it, so the price of the spectrum is higher. So I didn't hear nothing in Asia Pacific about secondary trade. Now, yesterday I liked very much what Nelio Marinelli spoke as not the priority of ACMA to get more money. Now, if the administration of India, Pakistan, others think that to get more money is better for the public, no. In 2001, there was a crash of operators and providers of equipment because the RF spectrum was too high. So we don't have to speak only about we have to speak about the stability of the operators and stability of equipment providers. All over the world, there are operators that are going down. You see it in France, in Israel, in Africa, and also in Asia. Many operators, because also of the RF spectrum, which is too high, they cannot survive. So if we look at the interest of the public, I don't say that we have to give the spectrum to those who provide a better service or better price. I didn't say, but this is one way that we made it in Israel. We gave the spectrum to those who promised the better service. What I want to say that the stability of the operators are very important. It is important for them to share the same networking in order to save spectrum, to save money, and to save human hazards. All those issues should be in the aspect that administration takes into account. Thank you, Chair.
What's the, okay, a question, maybe, yeah, Steinmeier.
I think it was more a comment than a question, but I think you asked about secondary trading. I don't have much experience with secondary trading, to be honest. I mean, in principle, we're all for it. I don't think it has been that much of it in Europe. Perhaps more frequently in the United States. But I think the difference between the United States and Europe and Asia is that when they auction the spectrum and you win it in the auction, you get a license for 10 years. But you more or less get an automatic renewal after those 10 years. Well, in Europe and Asia, I think it's more common that you only get a 15 or a 20-year license. So perhaps the incentive to trades are less. I'm not sure.
Yeah, generally speaking, spectrum trading is a good thing and should be encouraged because you're buying a license for 15 or 20 years, and a lot of things can happen in that period. So the ability to rearrange, sell it on to someone who might make better use of it is a very important aspect of efficient use of spectrum. So spectrum trading should be encouraged, and with that, an important aspect of that is it should not be taxed. There's some market where spectrum trading is being taxed. In other words, barriers are being put up to spectrum trade, and that's a bad thing.
Any other questions?
What about the stability of the operator?
So what that we should take into account the stability of operators, as in financially, or okay.
Well, generally speaking, mobile markets are now mature. So at maturity, you open the economic textbook, what happens? You don't get new market entry, you get consolidation. And we're now in the consolidation phase of the industry. And sometimes it's being actively encouraged by governments. For example, the telecoms minister in Indonesia came out, I think it was about a month ago, speaking out for consolidation, saying, well, we'd really would like to have 4 operators instead of 6 or 7. So viability through economies of scale, we're going to see more of this over the years to come.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, we see this large wave of consolidation across Europe, and you also see it in Asia in several countries. I mean, Pakistan mentioned that they were going from 5 to 4 operators. Bangladesh is moving from 5 to 4 operators. And over time, I think we will see less networks than operators. I mean, even if you have 3 or 4 operators, you might only have 2 networks. We see that in some countries in Europe already. So, I mean, people are consolidating and continuously looking for cost savings in many markets that are mature, I think. And when it comes to spectrum prices, you know how much or how large prices the industry can sort of sustain over time. I think government, to a certain degree, can choose good auction designs, fair reservation prices, fair auction rules. But also, I think the mobile operators themselves have to remind themselves that there is new spectrum coming along. The next auction is definitely not the last spectrum auction, and the history of mobile communications have shown that there will always be new spectrum for mobile, I think.
Yeah, I was expecting a question from someone from the satellite industry. So here at the front first, or
yes, it's great, but I don't have a satellite industry question, so I'm sorry. But from the Indian perspective, we heard that the higher the frequency band, and this is consistent with what we've heard from other speakers, the higher the frequency band, the lower the value. So you had your multiplier effect when you did your calculations. But in the case of Pakistan, I noticed, I think in 2014, it's a kind of minor point, but it's interesting, to me anyway. In 2014, you had set your reserve price for 1800 megahertz at a lower price than your reserve for 2100 megahertz, I think. And I just wondered, since that's counterintuitive and different than what your neighbor did, why did you make 2100 more value or set a higher value for it?
Yeah, it was, as I explained in the lessons learned, initially we wanted to sell only the spectrum for 3G, 2G, 3G, and then sometime 4G. But then we realized that we need to have some, and the operators also wanted only 3Gs. They were not much interested in 4G. So, but we thought that if we do not, we are already late, wasted a lot of time, and if at this time we do not sell 4G spectrum, then we may get further delayed. So what we did, that we said, all right, make sure that somebody has to buy first 21 megahertz. That's why we put a condition that anyone who gets 10 megahertz in 21 megahertz will be eligible for the 10 megahertz in 1800 megahertz. So that most or all of our 21 megahertz spectrum is sold, one thing, and then we put a lower cap on it so that at least 1 or 2 must come, so that there is a competitive pressure. Subsequently, Pakistan enters into 4G domain also. So that is the reason we kept and as it happened, only one operator qualified for the 1800 slot, and he was given the slot, and he opted to buy it also. And as I informed during the presentation, that at once one of the operators which had not opted to join the auction, as a result of this pressure, it launched LTE in its existing spectrum, and in 2G spectrum, 1800 megahertz band, and it could do so because we had already issued technology neutral licenses. And we feel that this has created some pressure, and the other operators are also now thinking of going for 4G.
Thank you very much for your response. I think we had one more question, or 2, 3, 4. I think, well, running out of time, we've got 3 more minutes, so yeah, please keep your questions and responses short. Starting.
Yeah, hi, my name is Nishan Chan. I'm from Plum Consulting. Both Hans and Stefan yourself, you mentioned the risk of, failed options is becoming more common. And I think in the note I circulated around this morning in terms of looking at the number of selected options, I think increasingly we're seeing options, like you said, basically with lots left unsold, and also almost half the options we witnessed recently ended up with prices very close to reserve price. So in effect, basically what you're saying is regulators setting a fixed fee for spectrum, in effect. So I was just wondering, is there a case, both from the operator's perspective and regulator's perspective, whether it's worth re-looking at maybe whether there is a case for beauty contest in terms of maybe a fixed price for spectrum and then for operators to pay by other means, say maybe coverage obligations, faster rollout, and so on, and maybe lower price packages for consumers, as opposed to just a pure monetary kind of payment. And yeah.
I'll go first. But I don't think beauty contests are the way forward, let's be absolutely honest. I think coverage obligations are great. You need to achieve your policy objectives, and I think spectrum should not just be there to raise money. And as you rightly pointed out, there's great potential for using mobile broadband to roll out into rural areas, especially when it comes to lower sub-1 GHz frequencies. So I would totally agree, and I think you're right that in some countries regulators may be a bit too optimistic, and by setting very high reserve prices, they end up with unsold spectrum and effectively set a fixed price for spectrum. So they might as well just just set the price and then ask who wanted it without going through the pain of running an auction. So I think that's a risk, and I think we should, in terms of the reserve price, that should be a walk-away price. It should ideally take into account what you could do with this spectrum if you didn't give it to anyone in the mobile industry, say, for example, as well. Or if, it should be a walk-away price rather than an expectation for how much money you want to get from the auction. So I would totally agree. I'll pass on to Stefan, because he probably wants to add a bit to that.
I'm sorry. It's closely linked to the expectation of whether there will be new market entry or not. And since we are in the maturity phase of the industry life cycle, new market entry is highly unlikely. So in setting an auction, one of the primary objectives will probably be to maintain the competitive equilibrium we have in the market. An example would be the 700 auction in New Zealand, where there's one very weak operator. So the reserve price, it wasn't too cheap, but they had 3 operators, 2 by 45 megahertz, and they had an initial cap of 15 megahertz each. So giving, to a degree, the weakest operator a fair shot at acquiring some spectrum, well, they only acquired 2 by 10, then the 2 by 5 that was left over went into a straight, no-holds-barred competition between Telecom New Zealand and Vodafone, and they paid a very, very high price for that incremental block. So you had the best of both worlds. You attracted the maximum value from the spectrum to the public purse, if you will, and maintained competitive equilibrium, and had a totally transparent process.
Time for one more question.
Thank you. Just from Vietnam, just one question for Stefan from Ceylon. In the slide, the presentation says that in 2015, the global mobile service revenue declined. So So is it decline in the trend or just happen in 1 year? So what are the main reasons for this decline due to the OTT? And I think that cutting the price of spectrum is just to reduce cost. But more important for operator is how to increase the revenue as well. So do you have any observation on that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's competition that's driving down prices. I mean, there's some markets, for example, Denmark is a case in point, very significant decline in nominal terms. In some markets, I mean, we've seen India, the nominal growth was 12%, but once we knock 7% inflation off that, we're down to low single-digit growth. And yeah, it's really all about competition, keeping prices low in large markets such as Indonesia, Cambodia, and many others. So this is actually a good thing because it shows that competition is working and the consumer is getting great value for money, both for voice and data.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much to the panel. We've got 10 minutes now, and I'd like you to come back here for the next session at 4 p.m. Thank you very much.